First things first, because while making this thumbnail, I got a song stuck in my head. And if I have to suffer, so do you.
You're a spineless, pale, pathetic lot, and you haven't got a clue. Somehow I'll make a man out of you.
With that out of the way, I've actually recorded the intro to this particular video 3 different times. And not due to technical issues. I'm going to get to the main video really fast here, but first I just want to address something. In an earlier video, I referenced the TED Talk by Cassie J about meeting your enemy. For those unfamiliar, it's a conversation about meeting someone with an alternative perspective. In her case, she spoke to male rights activists while she was very engrossed in the current feminist ideology. I'm not going to get too far into her video because really the only part that is relevant to my point is this.
After my year of filming, I was reviewing the 100 hours of footage I had gathered, replaying and transcribing it, which, believe me when I say, no one will ever listen to you more than someone who transcribes your words. You should write that down.
I want to be clear. I was paying attention and engaging with the guests during this panel. But I was also managing the platform and occasionally got kicked offline, so had to re-enter the conversation. But let me tell you, when I'm editing these videos, it's often 1 hour of work for every minute of footage you get to watch. And the big part of that is me going through every single audio clip multiple times, both to make sure that I understand the point that the guest is making and to make sure I'm matching the clip on screen to that point properly. As such, I was really forced to hone in and focus on every detail of this conversation. And at the time of the recording, I can honestly say I didn't appreciate the vulnerability these men show. I hope you'll enjoy it too. Originally, the plan was to watch 3 different clips of Batman saving Catwoman over the centuries and kind of discuss the differences we'd seen and what that might represent. But as we started the show, a natural conversation unfolded, with the panelists bringing up so many great ideas that I never would have even considered. And I simply couldn't bring myself to interrupt them just to follow a format. However, I will be inserting the clips as they come up in conversation so you know what the panelists are referencing. And at the end of the video, I'll make sure that they all tell you a little bit about themselves and where you can find their books. So a big part of the reason I invited you all on today is that I feel like the conversation about the strong female character is just kind of eclipsing certain elements about talking about masculinity in fiction. And I really don't think we can ignore that. I think that, ignoring one is basically like ignoring half of ourselves. So I wanted to really get your perspective on it. And obviously we all have agreed to go ahead and use Batman as our example just for context and to guide the conversation.
I think there's been a pushback on masculinity, which we're now having a kind of counter swing against, that the traditional old stoic aggressive type was there was a big push in traditional publishing toward the more, call it metrosexual ideal of a man. And so now folks are just kind of going around that to get the fiction they want, with military heroes and especially action heroes.
I think I might have the opposite take, honestly, and I might be showing my hand too early. I'll just say it right off the bat. The Batman of the 3 clips, the last one, the newest one, was by far my least favorite.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's done now. It's done. It's over.
To me, it just seemed like a boring, dreary, sodden mess. To me, it reeked of insecurity.
I think there's so much there that has to do with Batman in particular as a character, his trajectory in the last 40 years, which is to go head first into the darkness and the soberness of his character to the point where the films now exclude the fantastic elements of his character. The animated series was so great because it encompassed everything from the street, the noir, to the more fantastic sci-fi elements. And then when you overlay that with his trajectory vis-a-vis masculinity in the culture, you get something like what's going on in Absolute Batman, which is the current comic book series, in which he's the biggest he's ever been physically. You know, Bane in the comics is always like this 7 foot tall giant monster guy. Well, now that's Batman. And so in the comics, he gets more and more huge and hyper masculine, whereas in the films, it seems to be trending away from that into sort of, you know, the sort of with the Pattinson's version, what I'd call sort of the emo version of Batman.
I agree with both of you. However, on a clip by clip basis, I love the Pattinson, the clip at least. Maybe not, might not be my favorite Batman, but as far as the clips, with each of the clips being the Batman having an altercation with life on the line with Catwoman, I kind of enjoyed that one. It puts the Batman kind of on his heels where he needs to be saved now, where he always did kind of the saving before. But I liked it for a variety of different reasons. One being it showed him more in his humanity side, where he maybe was at a point where he was also in need of saving, and yet the Catwoman, it wasn't the whole like the strong female character lead who's coming in. It wasn't like the girl power version. It was just treating people as people, and at the end of the day, the Batman is a human. So I enjoyed that part of it. Emo-ness aside, I mean, and I'm a guy who lifts weights and has crazy dogs, but like masculinity to me is not purely defined by just working out. To me, like the most masculine role model I can think of throughout fiction is Mr. Darcy. It's more about holding the line with your morals and saying, here's the line and none shall pass. It's Mr. Darcy and Gandalf, and that's it.
I thought about this a while as we were leading into it. And I think we have to contrast what we're being presented as masculinity today with, like Karl said, more traditional values. I shared that Andrew Tate clip. I don't know if anybody bothered to watch it, but it's this just ridiculous, obscene, incredibly unhealthy, masturbatory sense of like, this is what it means to be a man. Go ahead.
I will say this: Andrew Tate is performative masculinity.
Yeah. I think one of the most masculine things that you can do is father children or mentor others. That's a pinnacle of masculinity in my mind, is being a coach, being a teacher, being a father, being a mentor.
Mentor them for good, not for evil, since we're talking about Andrew Tate.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. But there's, of the three Batmans we watch, only one of them is mentoring someone, and that's Adam West with, Robin.
Stay right where you are, Catwoman. Don't do it, Catwoman. You'll never make that jump with what you're carrying.
Just watch me, Batman. Batman, help me!
Hang on, Catwoman. When I throw the bat rope, reach out and catch it.
I'm afraid.
Let go of the bag, Catwoman. Then you'll be able to catch the rope with your free hand.
I can't let go of it.
Drop it, Catwoman. Otherwise, you'll fall into that bottomless pit. Nothing's worth that.
I can't let go. I can't. Catwoman! Can you hear me? Catwoman!
It's no use, Robin. She probably went straight to the bottom.
One thing that tends to get lost in both like the clips and a lot of people's perceptions of Batman is the pulp roots that Batman comes from. For those who might not know, Batman was initially a literal plagiarized clone of the Shadow. It was one of the most enduring and popular pulp characters of all ever created. At his height, the Shadow was more popular than Batman is in the modern era. And pulp stories were inherently masculine by nature, and that was something that's kind of bled out of Batman over the course of the years. You still see the roots of it in the 60s show, and you definitely see a lot more of it in the 80s incarnation of Batman in Tim Burton's movie, because the 80s was highly masculine in almost all media. This is where it ends up getting bled a little bit out when you get to Pattinson's Batman, because the pulp roots are kind of forgotten. The masculine roots are kind of forgotten. And lest we forget, Catwoman was a femme fatale. And for that kind of a relationship to work between the main character and a femme fatale, there has to be some kind of a spark there. And there's no spark between them in the Pattinson Batman movie, or at least none that I really picked up on. It could have just been a lack of spark between the actors, which that was certainly a problem in Dark Knight Rises, and she was just kind of there. There was just no spark whatsoever. To me, that is something that ends up getting lost. So without that kind of spark between the masculine and the feminine, your characters are just going to find themselves either incomplete or at some sort of character power dynamic imbalance.
So I got to agree with you on that. Especially with the clips that we watched from the Tim Burton iteration, the whole idea of the femme fatale was not so much a match of equal power for power. So there was this inherent recognition of gender roles.
You. I'm a woman.
I'm sorry,
As I was saying, I'm a woman and can't be taken for granted. Life's a bitch. Now so am I. Who are you? Who's the man behind the bed? Maybe you can help me find the woman behind the cat. No, that's not you. There you
are. She's slashing, she's punching, she's kicking, she's whipping Batman. He's backing up every time he throws one punch and floors her. So there's this recognition.
Floor, high fiber.
Yeah, just knocked her down, and she immediately goes, "How dare you? Oh my God, like you hit me!" And he's immediately apologetic. When we got the clips to watch, I'm like, I immediately knew the scene. This was a fantastic movie. I love this movie. And she's kind of doing the caressing thing, and just claws him right up in the weak spot. She finds the chink in his armor, which is very much what the femme fatales are about. They're not about they're about matching power for power until they discover that there's a chink in the armor, and let's go after the weakness, because it's a surer, easier path to victory for me. And I love that. I love that clip, and I fully agree.
And don't forget, in that scene, it was showing that she was willing to use seduction in order to give him pause long enough to find that weakness. There was a cartoon a while back called Batman the Brave and the Bold. It had a little bit of a callback to that moment where a woman said, "You wouldn't hit me, I'm a woman, would you?" And the Batman of that era said, "The fist of justice is unisex," and punches her anyway. It's hilarious.
Yeah, the clip we saw was very much showing the transition, because you had the old rigid rules of chivalry, gender roles, and a man would never hit a woman but it was also very clear that women were not to engage in physical combat. And when you rip up one of those rules, the rest of them are going to come down. You can take advantage of it for a little while, but that movie was made as that rule was collapsing, and we still haven't built a new set of rules we can depend on. So that's making things fairly chaotic in modern life.
Well, Batman is this coming up on his century here, his centennial, and the ethos in which he came out of is really dated. And one of the things that's very powerful in the Pattinson Batman is this sort of question about his wealth and what he does with it. And the Absolute Batman comic book series, which I mentioned earlier, completely upends his story to the point where he is not a billionaire in this. He is just another guy, and the whole thing is inverted. And so it's mirroring the culture now as opposed to 1938, 1939, which is where wealth was this aspirational thing, and where now there's this sort of antagonism towards people of extreme wealth and in the world that we presently live in. Coupled with that, you have the fact that male and female roles in society have fundamentally altered from where they were. It's difficult to square him or any character of his age to accommodate those things. However, Batman is by far the most elastic of any of the superhero characters, which is why you have so many different iterations of him, and he can fit into almost any space. That's why one reason he endures, and I think that's one way he's a really good lens for this conversation, because you can look back through every decade, going back to 1938, 1939, and you can see how he represents both the moment and then also is projecting forward.
You talked about some stuff jumping all the way back into an earlier area. I just was wondering if you had read Red Sun. It was kind of a mini shot for Superman. The Batman in that world, because Batman is, like you said, elastic. That Batman was poor, Russian, and actually was a group of people because they didn't have any money and they were just a vigilante justice and found a way to overcome. And that's something, that's maybe one of the most masculine things about maybe that iteration, because it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the physical strength. It was just about the adapt, improve, find a way, overcome, and accomplish your objective. It was a really, really fun comic and kind of sticks with you.
I feel like I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. I haven't read many of the Batman comics through the years. Sometimes I think the character has gotten progressively darker, and it's a little more masculine to be able to admit that he's an absolute mess. Adam West was fun. I was amazed at the job Michael Keaton did, because he was, prior to that, a comedian. But then from there, they just seemed to get stiffer, and made the movies harder for me to watch.
I'll give credit that I thought Twilight Twinkle Toes was going to be a lot worse than he was. But that wasn't a particularly high bar. The only vampire that can't become a bat played Batman. I thought that was ironic. But beyond that, we always talk about female standards of beauty and female, like how Barbie's waist is too small. Is there something you said for the fact that male standards within the hero archetype are also kind of becoming less and less realistic, and maybe setting a standard there that's not necessarily good or bad? Or what do you guys think?
Steroids are making it easier for the Hollywood guys to bulk up their muscle, and it's kind of gone from, oh, this is something that's possible, and it was possible, and therefore it becomes mandatory because everyone wants to have their superhero look buffer than the last superhero. And I've heard some scary stories about just how rough it is on the actors.
The standard's been really aggressively established by the MCU in the last 20 years. Chris Hemsworth is a great example of this. Just gets increasingly buffer with every version of Thor, every movie that they do, and that spills over into the women, where Brie Larson, who is otherwise very petite, just got absolutely shredded for the Marvels for, I think, no reason at all. But you also see a reaction to it, and you can see that in Pattinson, and you can see that in the brand new Superman, which is coming out next week, in which that actor David Corenswet he's not really defined by his muscles.
Yeah, I think it ebbs and flows. Like, let's not forget 1980s era Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone. You had to be a bodybuilder to be an actor. kind of going back to the idea of insecurity in masculinity. And I think when we feel insecure in our masculinity, we lean on, oh, well, he's big and strong. Muscle and power is great, but kind of to Karl's point earlier, with great power comes great responsibility. If you don't have that foundation, then muscles are just a tool in the toolbox.
I'd said that I think one of the most masculine characters that I know in fiction is Mr. Darcy, who is the male love interest from Pride and Prejudice. It's not about what you look like. It's not about physical strength. It's about being willing to say, no, this is the line. You cannot cross it. And if you want to challenge me on it, you're going to have to beat me. But there absolutely is that sense, though, that our culture has pushed out, that like this is what masculinity looks like. And it's not always right, because that's usually something that's flashy and sexy on TV or on the big screen so that it sells tickets. And quite honestly, most people cannot maintain that level of physicality to be able to have the ripped abs. Even if you watch stuff on the movies, they get up, they work out early in the morning, they film their scenes, and then they go to sleep because that's not a realistic standard.
My characters exercise so I don't have to. I saw something recently where somebody talked about the fact that Batman has traveled the world training and learning all the meditation and all kinds of other things and stuff like that. And some of those are not conducive to physical strength. They're conducive to a lean frame, smaller body. But there's that period there, again, especially in the 80s, and I think it's again now, where all of the male characters are just action stars, and it is just relentless action. You don't actually get to know that there's a person inside there, other than John Wick is really tough because he's the one that everybody's afraid of.
When was the last time we saw Batman do something detective based?
In the cartoon, voiced by
Kevin Conroy.
I'm about to get flack as the host. Who?
He was the voice of Batman in the animated series that was in the 90s.
Half of us mentioned him by name during the introductions when you asked our favorite Batman.
Are you listening to me? I look into your eyes and I can't tell whether you're getting anything I'm saying.
One thing I kind of noticed between Joe and Schmidt's point here, I'm kind of hearing that the physical muscles are a representation of traditional stoicism, like gentleman's stoicism, which is something we do seem to lack in Batman, who is a billionaire and would theoretically have been taught to be a gentleman. Is there kind of something to that in you guys' opinion?
I think that he is stoic because he's not the billionaire playboy that he could be. He's not out there sleeping with women and being the general. I know we're keeping this PG-13. The general jerkwad, I guess, that a lot of billionaires could be. He's allowing himself to fade into the background so the Batman can come forward at night, because at the end of the day, there's only so much the human body can do. So I think he is stoic, but sometimes he tries to keep up the appearances.
Some of this is getting into the bits where a man is defined by what he should not do, and Darcy is a good example, as always being a gentleman, even in the Pride and Prejudice and Zombies version, where his terrible wedding proposal turns into a kung fu fight. And I have to say, it's delightful watching him get kicked in the head for what he says. Only redeeming grace of that movie. But if you look at what the active thing is, in Breaking Bad, there is this speech by one of the villains, which, strikes the note of a man provides.
I have made a series of very bad decisions, and I cannot make another one.
Why did you make these decisions?
For the good of my family.
Then they weren't bad decisions. What does a man do, Walter? A man provides for his family.
This costs me my family.
When you have children, you always have family. They will always be your priority, your responsibility. And a man provides. And he does it even when he's not appreciated. or respected or even loved. He simply bears up, and he does it because he's a man.
Which is pretty much a major villain trying to talk the protagonist into continuing his villainy and saying it's like, it doesn't matter that your wife wants you to quit your life of crime and become a normal person again. Your job is to bring home as much money for your family, which is terrible subtext, but the speech itself is about a man's duty to take care of his family, to feed him, which, for me as a husband and father trying to keep a roof over my family's head, I mean, I would cheerfully quit my day job at the drop of a hat, but that's what I do to provide for my family. And this is an aspect of masculinity that is kind of understated. You don't see Hollywood making movies about providers unless they're drug dealers. And instead, you have the action heroes who are hitting people in the head. That is something where I think the culture has gone in an unhealthy direction.
When it comes to Batman, a lot of things that apply in that particular provider and nurturer relationship doesn't so much apply to him, because as Batman, he's denied a normal relationship. If I can reel it back towards like Stoicism, and you never forget that the Bruce Wayne aspect of his personality is always meant to be cover for him being Batman. The idea that this aloof gentleman billionaire that always has a model on his arm and is spending lavish money, going to parties. He couldn't possibly be dressing up as a bat, jumping off rooftops and inflicting overwhelming amounts of violence to psychotic freaks at night. That would be a ludicrous thing to think.
I think we should forget that Batman is inherently a broken person. Like, he could say, yeah, my parents got killed. That's terrible. I'll move on. I'll grieve them. I'll mourn. I'll seek out healthy relationships. I'll do what I can to improve the society with all the money I have. He wouldn't even be an interesting character. But I don't think any character is meant to be a role model, Batman in particular.
I do think he is a role model in a sense, because he does provide a picture of someone who is suffering from debilitating PTSD, that he's weaponized into this crusade against crime, and the entire franchise over the 80 plus years has become really about people's trauma. And that's embodied in Harley, who is a psychiatrist who is traumatized and then becomes, over her journey, this beacon of health and healing in ways that you could have never anticipated, to the point where she's actually advocating for Bruce to get help. She's probably not the person to provide it, I don't think. And you see that throughout the franchise. And I think in that way, overall, it's a fascinating and extremely worthwhile narrative. It's exaggerated like all superhero fiction is, but it provides this rounded sort of sense that here's a guy who's perfect at everything except himself.
There was a point in one of the movies where a lot of people forget about this, from Batman Forever, where he actually dated a psychiatrist, and at the end of the movie made the claims as, now I'm Batman not because I have to be, but because I choose to be, suggesting that he moved past his parents' death and became Batman out of pure choice. I feel a lot of people really forget that. Like, oh, we got to go back to traumatic Batman, just like we've always got to go back to teenage Spider-Man.
It's worth mentioning that what the impression of masculinity is for men, and this I think this still persists today, and maybe less so. There's more contention around it. That a man, a real man, he's going to be strong. He's going to be silent. He's going to sit in the background. He's going to provide. We've mentioned all these different things, right? A lot of those things still persist to this day, where we're always told what a man looks like. And when we see, even with Batman and masculinity throughout the ages, whether it's books and movies and TV shows, where we have this idea of masculinity that's given to us rather than what's lived out. And so we're always living, and I know this came up in the whole having the big muscles and stuff, where we're always told what masculinity looks like, and we need to live up to the status quo, even though it's maybe impossible, where we're always reeling in shock from what we're told to be, which is an impossible standard, which I absolutely understand. Females always have the same thing with the beauty standards. You got to look like Barbie, which is, if you were Barbie in real life, you would die. That's not a realistic standard to have. Men have that too, and I think that's worth mentioning. And Batman, that's the whole reason I think he's this depressive, kind of a dark character. He can't possibly cope with the trauma that he's been given. I know trauma is kind of a buzzword, and we real men don't deal with trauma. We just ignore it. We bottle up and push it down like real men, right? Especially if you're from the upper Midwest. But I think that's part of what makes Batman interesting as a character, is that dichotomy of what we're told masculinity looks like and what it actually looks like when it's lived out, whether you're a superhero or whether you're just working at Starbucks.
We talk about the Stoicism part, and I think we kind of overlook something there. And he could easily be a recluse. He's out all night fighting crime, usually gets the snot pounded out of him. He's got to be hurting. He should be home tending bruises and stuff instead of trying to be out social, because the first time somebody touches him, he's probably got to cringe.
Does that maybe, and maybe this is a stretch again, coming from a female perspective here, does that kind of maybe speak a little bit to some of the male experience where this is something I've heard from a lot of my male colleagues, my friends, my family members. There's kind of this need to hide your pain. And I think we've touched on that a little bit throughout this conversation, but does that kind of reach out to that experience in a hyperbolic way, much like the muscles do, much like the, vengeance of Batman does?
Anecdote from my teenage years. I was out at this camp and was wandering about and encountered a friend of mine who'd sliced his foot open while wading in the lake. And so his response was to go hide out so that no one would see him limping from the pain of this stuff. But we were close enough friends. We were next door neighbors. He trusted me enough to admit it to him. Possibly because I was a nerd and would not, endanger his jock cred by seeing a flash of weakness from him. So this is something, deeply ingrained at all levels for men. It's not something I talk about. It's you put up the front that you're supposed to put up.
There is definitely a determination or stick-to-itiveness or an ignore the pain, or however you want to phrase it, that I think is tied with masculinity, of getting the job done. And it's hard to question Batman's masculinity, right? Because he's active, he's trying to do good, he's kind of, as we're alluding to, he's buried his pain and is expressing it in a really odd way.
Like there is that whole aspect, like Karl, you brought it up, how we're not supposed to talk about pain, right? That quote from Predator, "I ain't got time to bleed." Like that's a very masculine sentiment, but also it's an inherent expectation. People don't want to know how you're actually doing. There's a formality. You meet somebody you haven't seen in a while, you shake their hand, you go, "Hey, how you doing?" The only acceptable answer to that is fine. The answer is not, I'm doing pretty bad. My dog just died. My wife is leaving me. That is not something that men talk about. That is off the table. As soon as you do that, all of your friends, they ghost you. Now you are worse off than before. So that expectation of where conversation is, it is a narrower window than it is for women. And you hear about this from, maybe I'm crossing the line here, but when you talk about women who have transitioned to men, and they come out and they have that conversation where a year later, and they're like, being a man sucks. Is so bad. Nobody talks to each other. Nobody's honest about their feelings. Nobody talks to me, especially in the bathroom. I go into the bathroom of the club and it is a wasteland. Nobody says a word. And then, of course, they probably use the middle stall in the bathroom, at the urinal, which is not something that anybody does. What a monster. But just the idea, like, there's this closed off area of conversations that women are very comfortable having, and men, we don't do it. And that's something that that's not something that's natural. That's something that we're taught. Maybe we're not taught directly, but we're taught indirectly that these are areas we don't talk about. Sit down, shut your mouth, and don't talk about your feelings, or you won't have any friends, and then you can't talk about anything.
My favorite fine moment is in the movie Gettysburg, where someone gets blown up by a cannon shell, and the general yells, "TJ, are you all right?" And dude is picking himself up, and it's like, "I'm tolerable, sir. I'm tolerable." And it's like, which is what I will use for, yeah, I'm in bad shape, but I'm not going to admit it, because that's about as much as a man will admit to, unless you actually have a limb removed.
Well, that's a flesh wound. That's no big deal. I'm amazed at the number of people that I encounter, and I say hi, and their response is, "How you doing?" And the look of shock's on their faces when I actually answer them. "I'm doing good. How you doing?" How you doing is an open-ended question, and they don't expect anybody to answer to it. It's just bizarre to me that you would use that in that case.
Actually, treating that as a question is, I think, a diagnostic for autism.
Well, I'm just going to say that I'm probably in there somewhere. So one thing that was touched on earlier was the idea of a boundary, as in, this is my line in the sand. This is where I'm crossing it. This is where I'm not going to cross it. Does that maybe in your guys' mind somehow relate to how in many iterations of Batman, he will not kill the Joker? And this brings up the moral question of how much damage he does by letting that man continue to go because he has this moral compass.
That's an interesting topic. Knowing that you said many iterations, because in the original iteration, of course, he killed people all the time. Superman did as well. I mean, it was a different world as far as the standards of what justice looks like. And that always represents that there are people who are willing to take creative license when it comes to legalistic interpretations of those things. And I think that the internal code of the Batman, or masculinity with any man, it's always dependent upon that person. But there is, I think, that an internal metric for it, and it's always worth finding out what that is. And of course, the problem is with men, we don't talk about it, and so it's very difficult to know. And you gotta really dive in just to be able to find out really what are the rules of engagement here.
I hate trying to come up with psychological explanations for stuff that's driven by the writer wanting to keep the villain around for the sequel.
Just call me out, why don't you, Karl?
I've done it too.
I do see when we talk about like toughness, a lot of times that toughness or masculinity gets replaced by just harshness or cruelty, and often just like in jokes or like comedians. Extremely cruel and yeah, maybe funny, but like that doesn't make you tough. And I think to Chris's point, being able to stand for what you believe in and sticking to your guns morally, I think that's a much truer measurement of toughness.
We're talking about toughness. I just wanted to add real quick. Both of my grandfathers were World War II vets, and my grandfather Ross in particular was on Omaha Beach on D-Day. And they never said a word to anybody. And the only person that Ross ever talked to about Omaha Beach was my dad, Joe, who was a Vietnam vet. And the only person that Joe ever talked about his experience in Vietnam was Ross. All I know about their experiences is a little bit that slipped out between them. And those men were in capital letters as far as a 5-6-year-old Darby was concerned, who fought in his war and served their country. But for them, it was, you always think of yourself as less than because your life is concerned with silly things like writing books and the mind and people's feelings and things like that. This is the world that they fought for. This is the world that they wanted for their sons and their grandsons. And this is the world that they killed a lot of people for. And we get tangled up in knots about masculinity and what it means to be masculine. But what it meant to be masculine was to be safe. It was to be secure and to have a future. However you got there. My dad gave up a lot. So you can sit on a YouTube stream and talk about masculinity.
So I'm a Iraq war veteran myself. And one thing that I found after I came back from these deployments is suddenly I had this, like, wherever I would go, suddenly, like, my masculinity was safe. And then when I didn't have to worry about that, then I was much more free to express things, interest and love for things that wasn't, proto-masculine, right? And how we can bring this back to Adam West Batman is, there's this old idea of, like, a Renaissance man who was not just, like, an athlete, but also an academic, right? And an artist as well. And of all the Batmans that we watched in those clips specifically, there's only one Batman that danced.
One thing I'd like to ask all of you gentlemen who were so kind to join me today is if you could give a writer advice on how to represent male characters, specifically not worrying about all the blah, 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 blah political nonsense they're hearing today. What do you think that would be?
Ooh, you're going to take the training wheels off. It's a dangerous area. For the record, all of you guys, I would totally knock over a bank with all of you guys. I think we could pull this heist off. I feel good about it. But there's a quote by Winston Churchill: "People sleep peaceably in their beds at night because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf." It's one of my favorite Churchill quotes. Sometimes you got to be the guy in the shadow, willing to met out the fist of justice when it needs doing, because not everybody who says that they're a man is, and that's maybe the weirdest part, is that it's so ethereal. It's so hard to define sometimes. But I think real men know what it is.
I think I would try to stress the compassion aspect of it in characters. I think I try to do that. I talk a lot about friendship and friends, true friends. And I've always felt for a long time that true friends are the people you can count on your fingers, because you would die for them or they would die for you. And I realized while in the process of writing that there's really one additional criteria, and this shows true toughness, and that is, are they willing to help you move?
And move bodies. I think Chris kind of touched on an important thing, which is, if you're going to, take the stereotypes, women often seem to be consensus driven. Men are much more likely to seek out conflict. Yes, you have men going off to war or just getting into fist fights, but you have them, creating sports leagues so that they can have a conflict with each other in sports. And if you have nerds, who aren't going to get into fist fights, they're going to, set up a bunch of Warhammer figurines. And if they're not tactical enough to win the battle, then they're competing in the contest to see who has the best painted Warhammer figurines. Yeah, I mean, it's a bell curve. But, men are much more likely to be wanting conflict and enjoying that there's a conflict.
I think for the most part, a good masculine character is a good person. At the core, people are generally the same, and we have more in common than we have differently. So, honest to God, I try not to think about masculinity too much. I think if a man is a good person, then he's showing good masculine traits. Maybe that's a cop-out. I don't know.
Nah, I kind of hear you on that one. I had someone tell me that they got mansplained the other day, and I'm like, I don't believe in mansplaining. I believe in being a condescending asshole, but I don't think that's gender specific.
I'll just say what I said on the conversation I had with you in regards to women. I think the most important thing when you're depicting anyone is just to listen, and to listen to what they're saying and getting the best insight you possibly can. I sort of consider myself a professional eavesdropper, and I'm very interested in how people talk and depicting the way that people talk in communication. If you listen to the way people talk, you'll get a strong idea of how they think, and not just what they say, but what they don't say. And that'll allow you to draw really comprehensive characters.
Gentlemen, if I may call you such, thank you so much. And before we get into the outros and, where people can find your books, podcasts, whatever, I just want to thank you for some of the vulnerability that you showed. if we could all just go around and let everyone know where they might find your books or media. My name is E.H. Drake. I am the shocker runner of the E.H. Drake podcast and also author of the Blood Herring Chronicles. And my absolute favorite Batman is actually going to be from Batman Returns. And it's not the Batman's fault. It's because a bunch of penguins rocking around in rockets is just the cutest wave of destruction you will ever see.
John A. Douglas. I am the author of The Age of Adventures, The Black Crown, and coming soon, book 2, The Lionheart, Icon of Justice. And my favorite incarnation of Batman, gotta say, hit at the right time, was the Kevin Conroy animated series version. It just kind of encapsulated everything that was great about the kind of the darker turn that Batman was taking, while still kind of incorporating a lot of the heroic aspects that make Batman such an enduring hero. I almost said villain for some reason. That makes him stand the test of time.
My name is Christopher D Schmitz. I write books that nerds like. My favorite iteration of Batman is probably the Batman Beyond, because I mean we had it all, right? We had the future cool stuff, some cyberpunk, as well as Kevin Conroy coming back, training the next iteration. So loved it.
My name's Joe Prosit. I write sci-fi, horror, and psycho fiction, and my favorite iteration of Batman is the 1990s animated series. It's got the Mark Hamill Joker, the introduction of Harley Quinn, that really cool Art Deco style. For me, that was the most fun I've ever had with Batman.
I'm Darby Harn. I'm author of sci-fi and fantasy novels, including my latest, which is Dead Malls. And since the animated series is off the board, I'm going to go with Batman Year One, which was the 1987 series by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, which is an all-time classic.
I'm Karl K Gallagher. I am an author of science fiction and fantasy novels and short stories. Many of my novels have been finalists for the Prometheus Award for Best Libertarian Science Fiction Novel. I have monthly short stories you can find at my Substack. And my favorite Batman, and this is just plain early imprinting, is Adam West, campy 60s television Batman. Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
I'm A.W. Powers. You can find me on my website, awpowers-writer.com. I write paranormal thrillers, and it's the Psychic Guardian Angel series. I also write regular thrillers. Beyond that, I fumble around on Facebook. I've been playing around on Discord, and beyond that, I really don't know what I'm doing on social media. My favorite Batman is probably the Michael Keaton version.
I want to again thank all of these gentlemen for the vulnerability they showed in talking about the experience of being a man, talking about things that in many ways are forbidden in the male community. I can't imagine going through life without talking about what I think and feel. In fact, if you meet me in real life, I pretty much never shut up. And if you'd like to continue to support these interviews and video essays, please make sure you are subscribing to this channel. It's insane to me how fast this channel is growing, and I only have you guys to thank for that. But as always, thank you so much for joining us, and happy writing.